A haunted cemetery, multiple spooky houses, and more ghosts than they know what to do with. Savannah, Georgia is considered the most haunted city in America for a reason. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to May's Mortem. Do I need to wash out these cups? Yes. Look away. Shh. Don't tell anybody. Recently, I took a trip to go see my family in Savannah, Georgia. I also got proposed to on this trip, but that's a completely different video I can link up above. But I figured since I was going to be in the most haunted city in America, I might as well film at some of their more spooky locations. In this video, we're going to discuss the house that sits on 432 Abercorn Street and Bonaventure Cemetery. Before we start, I need to make a disclaimer that this video is for educational purposes. Viewer discretion is advised because this video will have content concerning murder and child abuse. We will also be discussing sensitive topics such as racism in this video, because you can't really talk about the history of the Deep South without also discussing racism. As usual, here's a shot of my outfit for today. My blouse is Bodyline, my dress and my socks are Baby the Stars Shine Bright, and my hat was by an artist whose name I cannot remember, so I'll put that in the description. Alright, now that we've got all of that out of the way, I can pour the tea and we can get into it. Okay, let's go. So to start this video, let's discuss the home that sits at 432 Abercorn Street. The home that sits at 432 Abercorn Street was built in 1868. It was built in the Greek Revival style for the family of Benjamin Wilson. The home was finished in 1869 and was valued at about $20,000, which in today's money would be about $400,000. By the time it was built, it was the most expensive home in all of Savannah. Unfortunately, however, it seems that the home was built on land that was formerly a cemetery for enslaved peoples. In fact, most of Savannah's buildings and infrastructure are built on native peoples or enslaved peoples' burial grounds. So now that we know a little bit more about the home and the land that it sits on, let's talk about some of the spooky stories they say took place there. This first story is a story that's often told by tour guides in Savannah, so if you've been on a ghost tour before, you might have heard this one. Earlier we mentioned that the home was originally built for the family of Benjamin Wilson. Mr. Wilson lived there with his wife and his 2 children. Until one day, tragically, his wife passed away of yellow fever in the mid-1870s. After the death of his wife, he became very mean and abusive towards his children. To escape her father, Mr. Wilson's daughter would go to the public school across the street from their home and play with the children in the schoolyard there. One day, Mr. Wilson caught his daughter playing at this public school and he got mad at her because he believed that those children were beneath her. They were a very wealthy family and going to public school was free, so she was playing with, the poor kids, I suppose. After punishing her for this, she apparently went back again the next day to play with the kids again. Also, as a side note, some versions of this story say that Mr. Wilson's daughter was playing with the public school children who were actually black and not white. However, according to the school's historical marker, it says that the school only served as a school for freedmen for a couple months after the Civil War. My researcher Maggie actually did manage to dig up a class photo that was taken some years after the incident we're discussing, and in this photo all of the children are white. Savannah did not have integrated schools during this time period, so it's not likely that the children going to the school at the time of this story were black. It's likely that some of the tour guides or people in town added this tidbit into the story to add a layer of scandal and racial conflict. Of course, without us being there in the past, none of us can really know. I also don't doubt that they were actually racist during this time anyways, because it was the late 1800s in the American South. But I would like for us to have all of our facts straight, you know what I mean? Anyways, back to the story. After Mr. Wilson caught his daughter escaping to the schoolyard to play with the other children a second time, this made him furious. To punish her for her defiance, Mr. Wilson tied his daughter to a chair facing a window that looked out over the schoolyard, so she had to watch the children playing without her. It's said that he kept her there for several days until she died of heat stroke and exhaustion. And apparently, in this story, Mr. Wilson did not face any punishment for his crime. He was an important man in town and no one wanted to challenge that. They say that his daughter's spirit remained in the home and haunted her father, appearing to him as an apparition. This apparently drove him mad to the point where he shot himself in the head. So now that we know just one of the scary stories surrounding the house, let's talk about some of the facts that we dug up. Apparently, Mr. Wilson did not die by suicide and he did not die in Savannah. Per his death records, he actually passed away in Colorado in 1896. He also had 2 children named Carrie and Mary, and they both got married and lived well into adulthood. So it sounds like that story might just be one big falsification, but what about the next story? These ones are a little bit shorter, so I'll try and get through them quick for you. This next story is concerning what is apparently a triple homicide. They say sometime around the late 1950s, a young couple and their 2 daughters moved into the home. During one holiday season, they had some family friends consisting of another young couple and their 2 daughters come to visit, so we have 2 sets of parents and 4 young girls living in the house. The 4 parents decide that they want to go out for a long evening, so they leave their 4 teenage children at home. However, after coming home from their long night out, they find that 3 of the girls had been murdered. Their bodies had been laid out in the foyer in a triangle shape, and their organs had been taken out of their bodies. So there were 4 girls in the house, but only 3 of them are dead, so where's the 4th one? They say that she was found thankfully alive, cowering in a closet upstairs, unable to speak or say what had happened. And rumor has it that this is the same woman who owns the house today. Allegedly, she will not allow anyone to live on the property because it's cursed. Also, another factual side note, this is likely untrue considering the fact that the house was just recently sold to new owners. So the fact that the house is cursed must not be such a big deal anymore. Anyways, let's move on to the 3rd story. This next story is concerning a portal to hell. At one point in the home's history, an art student who was living there mysteriously disappeared. This led to rumors that said that he had apparently been transported to another dimension by demons. Another rumor from around this time period said that Anton LaVey actually tried to buy the home as a headquarters for the Church of Satan. This has also been deemed false, apparently. It sounds like none of the stories surrounding the home have any factual evidence to back them up, which makes me feel a little bad for the current owners because they probably get a lot of looky-loos through their windows. Tourists that visit the house say that they feel negative energy outside of it and also say that they've taken pictures of ghostly apparitions in the windows. So now that we feel like we know everything there is to know about this one spooky house in Savannah, let's move across town to Bonaventure Cemetery. Let's start with the history of the cemetery. In 1762, a man named John Malern purchased the land that would eventually become Bonaventure Cemetery. It was 3 miles outside of Savannah, Georgia, and would eventually become as big as 600 acres. The land that would become Bonaventure Cemetery was originally a plantation. John chose the name Bonaventure Plantation because Bonaventure means good fortune. A fun fact is that John actually put the plantation land under his wife Claudia's name, which I'm sure was seen as a very sweet gesture at the time, allowing a woman to own her own land. On the land next to the plantation, a man named Josiah Tottenall actually purchased some more land after he married John's daughter. So basically what I'm saying is there's a lot of land in this one area belonging to one family. But during the Revolutionary War, this family was actually British loyalists, so they had to flee Georgia, leaving their land behind. In their absence, the main home on the Bonaventure plantation was actually used as a hospital during the Civil War, which ended up having a lot of soldiers die on the land and also be buried there in unmarked graves. In 1782, the plantation and the land next door were eventually sold by the state of Georgia at auction. It was then bought by the Habersham family, who owned it until 1785. And then lo and behold, in 1785, Josiah Tottenall actually came back to Georgia and he bought his land from the Habersham family. He also then passed this property on to his son. Fast forward to 1846, the plantation home that was on the property actually burns down. And then after the home burnt down in 1847, the Tottenall family sells the land to a man named Peter Wiltberger. I know that was a lot of exchanging hands, but that's a brief history. Also, as a historical side note, we are unsure as to what kind of plantation this land was, whether it was for cotton or tobacco, and we also are not sure how many enslaved individuals were on this land. But considering the size of the plantation, it's likely that hundreds of enslaved peoples were working there until the end of the American Civil War. So now that we know a little bit about the history of the land and how many times it changed hands, let's talk about facts about the cemetery. So I mentioned earlier that a man named Peter Wiltberger bought the land. He bought the land with the stipulation that he was to take care of the family cemetery that was on it. He eventually turned this family cemetery into a public cemetery, and he called it the Evergreen Cemetery of Bonaventure. In fact, one of the first prominent citizens of Savannah to be buried there was his own wife. The cemetery included segregated burial sections for the black and white deceased, and in 1909 the cemetery was expanded to include a section for Savannah's Jewish community. The cemetery is the resting place of a musician named Johnny Mercer and also the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Conrad Aiken, along with many other famous Savannah residents. The cemetery was even featured prominently in the 1994 book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. It was also a movie in 1997. I did watch the movie and it was extremely long, so only watch it if you're really in for a slow film. Some people really like it though. This book featured a famous statue which is known as the Bird Girl statue. She's standing there like this, you know, like that. The statue became famous essentially overnight, and a lot of people were coming to visit and see her, which was also kind of destroying her because, people were taking chips out of her, minor vandalism, if you will. So she was actually moved by her owners into the Jepson Center in 2014 so she could be safe. And I believe you can still see her there today. Even though the tourism did harm the Bird Girl statue, it turned Bonaventure into a tourist attraction. Terry Shaw, the chairman of the Bonaventure Historical Society, said in a 1997 LA Times article, "I must tell you that I'm not a fan of this book. Dirty linen it is, and it brings, well, a certain low-class tourist to Bonaventure." Goodness gracious, Terry. Regardless of what Terry felt about the situation, the book boosted tourism to Savannah by 50%. So now that we know everything historical and factual there is to know about Bonaventure, what about the ghost stories? The first story is that of Gracie Watson. Gracie was the daughter of the managers of the Pulaski House, which was a prominent Savannah hotel in the 1890s. Gracie was a crowd favorite and was known for entertaining hotel guests. However, she tragically died of pneumonia at age 6 in 1889, and her parents were devastated. So they commissioned a life-size sculpture of her likeness for her grave at Bonaventure Cemetery and hired prominent Savannah sculptor John Walls to do it. Gracie is said to haunt her own gravesite as well as the Pulaski Hotel where her parents worked. Tourists have said that they've seen Gracie's ghost playing in Johnson Square, and she's always completely silent and dressed in white. Visitors also bring Gracie books and toys to her gravesite, and they say that her statue cries tears of blood when they are removed. I don't think that there were actually any toys on her gravesite when I went to visit, but I guess you guys are going to see the footage anyways, so you guys remind me. Besides Gracie, another haunting that they say they have in Bonaventure Cemetery is the hellhounds. Visitors say they claim to hear dogs howling and walking around while on the grounds. They also say that no one's ever actually seen the hellhounds, but that you can feel their breath on the back of your legs. Besides the hellhounds, they also have stories of moving statues, statues that change positions or glare at you. They also say that if you're in the cemetery at night, you can actually hear the sounds of a dinner party going on. They also say that the statue of the bird girl that we mentioned earlier is also haunted by the model that inspired it, but that girl actually lived well into her 90s, so I don't really think that one is true. So what do you guys think? Do you think any of those stories were particularly scary? For me, walking around the cemetery was very delightful. I think cemeteries are very beautiful. I did take a lot of footage of my favorite gravestones, so I'm going to put them in a montage here at the end of the video so you guys can see them too. Think of it as a treat for making it all the way to the end. As usual, please hit like and subscribe. I'm still just a new YouTuber, so it really helps me out a lot. Thanks for watching my first October video. I hope the rest of October will be just as fun for you guys. I'll see you again next week, okay guys? Enjoy the montage. Oh my goodness, my bangs are a situation. Oh my, oh my, oh my, oh my! Come now. Come on. This led to rumors saying that he had been transported to another dimension by demons. Wow.